Hello, everybody. I'm Graham Dallas. I work for the Toronto Stock Exchange. I'm based in London, and I'm in charge of international business development for the markets of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And it's a great pleasure to be participating in the Minex Forum for 2020. Um, I'm going to talk about our markets. I'm going to talk about our markets specifically for mining companies. But I'm going to start by speaking a little bit about Canada, where the Toronto Stock Exchange is based. And really, the story I want to tell is one of financial stability and regulatory predictability. Canada offers an excellent base for financial markets, consistently voted the #1 G20 country for doing business. Canada has the lowest debt to GDP ratio amongst any of the G7 countries. And it's, again, consistently voted as having one of the soundest banking systems in the world. So it provides a very strong base from which to finance your business. The Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange, I'll give you a few key statistics. We have just over 3,200 listed issuers in total. Last year, in 2019, $39 billion was raised in new equity by those companies. And to put that into some sort of context, in the world of stock exchanges, we're number 3. So over the last 5 years, from 2015 to 2019, Canada, the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange raised about $250 billion, which puts us third in the world behind the Chinese markets and behind the US markets, but firmly ahead of the markets of the London Stock Exchange and AIM, and also Australia. It's based in Canada, of course, the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Venture Exchange, but the people who trade and invest on that market come from all over the world. We've got institutions and investment banks from all over the Americas, from all over Europe and Asia. All the leading names are present in our market. So by being listed in Canada on the Toronto Stock Exchange, you have access to global investors and global providers of capital. We think that on average, about 40% of every day's trade on our markets comes from outside Canada. And about 25% of the people trading on our market are headquartered outside Canada. One of the reasons why we have success, I mentioned that Canada broadly offers a very stable and predictable platform. The TSX itself mirrors that. It's a very stable and predictable market for companies. The regime is pragmatic, practical, and really designed to support companies. One example of this is the way in which the likelihood of a class action by shareholders is really much, much lower in Canada than it is in the United States, for example. Liability is capped, and probably the easiest way to demonstrate that or to illustrate that is the fact that insurance for directors and officers of a company listed in Toronto is much, much cheaper than equivalent insurance for companies listed on the US markets. It's a more stable, lower risk, and lower cost listing regime. One of the things that's really unique about Canada is the structure that we have of a junior market and a senior market. The Toronto Stock Exchange is the senior market and the TSX Venture Exchange is the junior market, and the relationship between the two is very, very successful. In 20 years, 679 junior companies have graduated from that junior platform onto the TSX. 19% of our blue chip index is made up of companies that began their lives on the TSX Venture Exchange. About 32% of the senior market is made up of companies that began on the Venture Exchange. And for the mining industry specifically, this is even more noticeable. 53% of all the TSX mining companies began their lives as mining companies on the junior market, the TSX Venture Exchange. Other stock exchanges offer a junior senior structure, but none of them is anywhere near as successful, as consistently successful in producing companies that go on to grow, to prosper, and become large companies, and in some cases to join blue chip indices. This is something unique to Canada. So that's something about the market in general. I'm going to talk now for 5 minutes very specifically about mining. Toronto is pivotal in the financing of mining companies all around the world. The Toronto Stock Exchange ecosystem supports 48% of all the global mining companies that are listed anywhere in the world. 48% of all the publicly listed mining companies in the world are listed in Toronto. We provide a great platform for these companies. They get excellent analyst coverage. We have over 200 mining analysts covering these companies, and there's a particular strength, I would say, in the sort of small and mid-sized segments of the market, where companies in Toronto get far better analyst coverage and investor attention than on equivalent companies, equivalent exchanges outside of Canada. Toronto really is the leading stock exchange for mining companies. We have 1,100 mining companies listed, or just over, which is more than almost twice as many as Australia, almost 10 times as many as London and AIM added together, and more than those two added together. And in terms, it's not just the number of companies, it's also the amount of money that those companies can raise. Again, over the last 5 years, 37% of all the money raised, equity, by publicly listed mining companies in the world was raised in Toronto. 37% in Toronto. That's a consistent year-on-year feature of our markets. And in fact, if you just look at last year, 2019 alone, in fact, that in 2019 our market share was up to 56%. But that was exceptional. Somewhere between 35 and 40% is what we do year on year. There is no other stock exchange that has anything like that financing capability for mining companies anywhere in the world. The mining sector in Toronto is very diverse. It doesn't really matter what you're mining. We have more gold mining companies than anything else, but the industrial metals are very well represented, as are things like diamonds, battery metals, industrial minerals, and of course uranium is also very important for us. And in terms of location of the projects, of where the mines and the sites are, again, it's all over the world. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But it's a very diverse market by geography and by commodity. I do want to emphasize just how strong Toronto is for mining companies, specifically for mining companies, compared to the other stock exchanges. So again, over the last 5 years, about $43.5 billion raised by mining companies in Toronto. As I said, that's 37% of all the money raised. And specifically, that is roughly as much as Australia, the New York market, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, and AIM, all added together, is about the same as what was raised in Toronto. So Toronto is the place to raise dollars for your company in the mining sector. It is a global mining market. Toronto, half of our companies are their projects are in Canada, but 47% of the projects, that's over 2,500 projects, are financed by companies in Toronto, and with the projects being outside Toronto. So in Europe, for example, we've got 23 listed issuers working on 50. We've got 23 listed issuers on the TSX and another 50 on the Venture Exchange. So over 70 issuers working in Europe, another 13 issuers working in Russia and the former Soviet Union, companies like Lydian, Centerra, and so forth. So it's very much a global market for companies and projects all over the world. Drilling down into who those issuers are, so we've got about 1,100 mining companies. 900 or something just over 900 of those are listed on the Venture Exchange. They're junior companies, and they've got an aggregate mining cap of $19 billion. 200 odd companies listed on the TSX, but with an aggregate market cap of over $360 billion. So you can see the Venture Exchange is for junior companies, much smaller companies on average. We welcome the concept of companies being listed on more than one stock exchange. So we have over 120 companies that have dual listings, whether that's in London, in Australia, in New York, in some cases in Latin America and around the world. So dual listing is very much a part of our business that's known, understood, welcomed, and non-problematic. And just to drive home the relative position of the TSX and the TSX Venture Exchange one more time compared to these others, if you look at it by number of companies listed, by the amount of money raised over 5 years, 1 year. I mean, last year, for example, our mining companies raised $12.5 billion, far more than all the other significant mining exchanges added together. The market cap is actually a little small, is not the biggest on the Toronto for the mining companies. We have our market, the aggregate market cap of our listed mining issuers is about $380 billion, which is less than the ASX or the New York Stock Exchange. But that's really because they have a number of the very large, the sort of super major mining companies congregate there. I think it's fair to say that Toronto's strength really is in the sort of intermediate size, the small and the mid-sized companies, where we really offer a platform that's tailored to their needs, particularly in terms of listing for the first time and raising money. And just look at the number of listings last year. It wasn't our best year by some measure, but there were 29 new mining companies listed in Canada, compared to what, about less than 20 on the other major exchanges added together. So it's really a very important market. There isn't another market as important for mining companies. Leave you with this: the advantage that the TSX and the Venture Exchange offer. Really, number one is that we have the leadership position in mining. If you're in the mining industry, you need to think about Canada. We offer a flexible route to market, access to investors all across North America and indeed around the world, and a number of flexible structures that make life easier for issuers to raise money quickly and cost effectively. The market's busy, the bankers are busy, there's growing interest. There's been a lot of M&A activity. There's been increasing new issuance. I'd say that explorers are once again being financed. The mining sector in Canada on the TSX and the TSX Venture Exchange is in excellent shape. And I look forward to talking to some of you. I hope the conference is valuable, useful, and enjoyable. Thank you.